This is from a series of interviews that I shot in January of 2021 for the Mind, Body, Soul documentary project, where we will be hiking the Continental Divide Trail and exploring the effects that nature has on our well-being. To find out more about the project, visit mindbodysoulfilm.com. My name is Alex Maier, and I'm a freelance documentary filmmaker now, I guess. It's something that I've been kind of working towards for a long time, and it's only started to become a reality within the past year or so. We are down by the Yellowstone River in Paradise Valley, right outside of my home in Livingston, Montana. I think when I think about nature, I think about the original place. It's like nature is the first thing that's existed, and that's kind of where we came from. I think of nature being our home and maybe like our birthplace as humans, and everything that's not nature is something that's kind of grown out of nature.
How did you discover nature?
I spent time in nature my entire life. I grew up swimming at lakes a lot, mostly. That was kind of my experience of being in nature. But I didn't really appreciate it or actively pursue nature until I went to college. I grew up in southeast Wisconsin. It's kind of a mixture of farmland and city, depending on where you are, but everything's pretty well developed. And when I went to college, I went to Northern Michigan University and Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And if you don't know anything about the UP, it's pretty remote. It's just forest, basically, for 99% of the whole landmass there. There's not a lot of civilization. And that's really where I discovered my passion, I guess, for nature and for going out into it. So basically, since my freshman year in college, I think that's where I started going down this path. And it's just gotten more and more extreme since then, pretty much. At first, I was just doing day hikes, and that turned into overnight camping. And eventually, it took a while, but that turned into backpacking. That wasn't until my last year in college, where I did a 18-mile backpacking trip in the Porcupine Mountains State Park. It took us 3 days to go 18 miles, so it wasn't like a super intense backpacking trip, but that really opened my eyes to like what was possible and what I could do out in the wilderness. Once I realized that I could just go out into the woods with a backpack on my back and just be totally self-sufficient out there for days at a time, the potential just seemed endless to me. That was one ingredient to the path that I'm on now, and the other ingredient is that I merged my passion for hiking with photography. So I always knew that I wanted to make movies for a living. In high school, I thought I might end up in Hollywood or something. But the more time I spent in nature, the more I realized that I kind of needed to become some kind of outdoor filmmaker. That was basically the only path that I thought that I would be happy going down in life. So when I graduated college with a degree in digital cinema, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, but I had no idea how to actually make that happen. So that was ingredient number 2 on this path, and I think the third ingredient was fear. After graduating, I had that degree. I knew what I wanted to do, but it still seemed like kind of a childish dream. It didn't really seem like a realistic goal. It's kind of like saying that you want to be a professional artist for a career. A lot of people want to do that. Very few people that can actually make a living doing it. So my dreams were kind of coming into contact with reality, and I kind of had to make a decision. Either I had to do what it would take to turn that dream into a reality, or I would have to accept that I was going to go down a path that I was not going to feel fulfilled in. And I was very afraid of going down that path, because I knew that if I chose to live a life that was going to be unsatisfying, I would have a hard time living with myself. And I think that's where a lot of that fear came from. I knew it wasn't going to be a good life. So basically I had one option. I had to figure out how to turn this dream into a reality. And the best way that I could figure out how to do that was to hike the Pacific Northwest Trail. So that's a 1,200 mile through hike from Glacier National Park in Montana to the Pacific Ocean, and it ends at Olympic National Park. It's a pretty remote trail. It's very unestablished compared to the popular through hikes like the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail. And I chose that one on purpose because I wanted the solitude. I knew that I wouldn't see a lot of people out there. I wanted to know that if I did this trail, that I did it on my own, that I didn't really do it without the help of a whole lot of other people. And I was going to make a movie about that hike, so if I could make a movie about a 1,200 mile walk, then I could actually take myself seriously as an outdoor filmmaker. That was going to be my test, basically, to see if I had what it takes to turn this dream into a career. Something that I wasn't expecting from that hike was the kind of deep, emotional and personal dive that I did within myself. So by the time that I finished that 3-month hike on the PNT, it was basically already a given that I was going to be an outdoor filmmaker, at least in my eyes. That wasn't a doubt anymore. I knew that that's what I was going to pursue. But the new thing, the kind of new addition on this path, was the benefits that one can find in nature on a kind of deeply personal level. That's something that kind of caught me by surprise. I didn't really know about that until I spent 3 months in the wilderness, and that's what really fascinated me. I think that became my new passion, and the filmmaking and the hiking were kind of just like vehicles for exploring this new path that I was going down. And basically ever since that hike in 2015, I've been on that path to explore how spending time in nature is good for a person's well-being. By the time I got to my Hayduke hike in 2018, I had a very good idea of what my message was, what I was exploring, and kind of what my purpose was in life, really. And that was to basically put myself in extreme situations out in the wilderness and explore how they benefit my life, and then to kind of translate that into a message that's more universal for everybody to understand, so that hopefully other people can kind of reap the benefits of my suffering out there. Mind, body, soul, this hike on the CDT is just going to be a further exploration into these topics.
Why is nature important to you?
So I've basically built my entire life around nature and trying to spend time in nature. It's been a goal of mine for probably about a decade now to have a lifestyle and a career that allows me to be out in nature as much as possible. For me, nature it's essential for my overall well-being, not just physical health, but mental health especially. When I go long periods of time without spending time in nature, I feel like my mind starts to get cluttered and kind of messy inside there. So spending time in nature is kind of my way to recalibrate and kind of get back in touch with who I am and what I need in life, I think.
Is nature for everyone?
I've been trying to figure out for a while now if nature is for everyone or not. My instincts tell me that everybody needs nature, but that might just be me kind of projecting onto the rest of the world. I think we as humans and as a society have kind of evolved so far and gotten so far away from nature that a lot of people don't really need nature in their lives anymore, and they can get along just fine without it. I think I'd like to say that everybody's life would be improved if they had nature in it, but I do think that you can live a perfectly fine life without spending time in nature. I think a lot of the positive things that I and other people find in nature can be found in other aspects of life too, and you don't necessarily need to go into nature to find a lot of these sort of life lessons or character building experiences and stuff like that. There's a lot of other avenues for that, but I think that nature is kind of the best environment to find that stuff.
What are some common problems in modern society?
When I think of the average American or just modern society in general and the kind of lifestyle that we live, a lot of what I think about is stress and anxiety and some form of mental health or distress. I think a lot of people are dealing with that. It's kind of undiagnosed in most cases. I think a lot of people just accept that that's kind of normal, that that's just what it means to be an adult in a modern society, is that you're going to be under a lot of stress all the time, and that anxiety is just kind of a normal part of life. It's kind of sad that we've accepted that and that there's nothing that you can do about it, or that we've accepted it as normal, because I don't think it has to be normal. Stress manifests in all kinds of ways in people's lives. For some people it might turn into physical health problems, like maybe you have heart disease or something like that. But a lot of times I think stress manifests in behavioral patterns too. And it can be hard to kind of draw a link between bad things that happen in your life and behavioral patterns that you might have some control over. So I definitely see this in my own life a little bit too, and I think because I have done some of these long hikes and I've spent long times in nature where naturally your stress level just kind of goes down, that's kind of become my baseline for what like a healthy stress level is. And so when I compare my regular life when I'm not in nature to those times, I can see that I'm definitely under a constant level of stress at times in my life. So I'm definitely not impervious to this too, and it's kind of just a result of the way that we live our lives, I think. Especially as we've been preparing for this hike, it's just been non-stop work basically all the time. I'm probably working 12 hours a day at least, either with my editing jobs or preparing for the hike, and it's just constant activity all the time that we always have to get stuff done. And because of that, I can feel my kind of low background level of stress is always a little bit higher than it should be, and it takes a toll on my mood, it takes a toll on my attitude, definitely takes a toll on my patience that I have with other people in my life, especially Amy sometimes, I think.
Do you need nature?
I've known this for a long time, that I need to spend time in nature in order to just keep me balanced out and keep me level. It's a big part of the reason why I have pursued the sort of path in life that I have, where I'm trying to incorporate as much time in nature as possible. I can feel the stress and the clutter in my mind just kind of building up when I'm not going out into nature. And I see nature as a tool basically for kind of reducing all that stuff and just basically filtering out all the unnecessary clutter in my mind, reducing that stress level, and kind of getting me back to baseline. And part of that has to do with just physical exercise, so you don't need to go into nature to do that. Just exercising is a big part of what helps clear my mind. But there's something about being in nature too that it works on a more mental and maybe even spiritual dimension when you're in nature. So when you're spending time in nature, you're spending time in what I would consider to be the natural order of things. The processes that happen in nature have obviously been happening for eons, and they work. They've basically been proven by the test of time. When we're in regular life in society, there's a lot of processes going on there too that are they're constantly being influenced by either myself or by other people, and I think they're a little bit less trustworthy just because they haven't been around as long, and we don't know for sure if these are the processes that are going to work long time. So in my regular life, I'm constantly being influenced by all these outside forces. So I'm always having to kind of balance that and weigh that with my own perspectives or how I think things should be. When I'm in nature, it's only me. There's no other outside forces that are trying to influence me. It's kind of like a purely objective environment. So I know that whatever I'm experiencing, whatever kind of thoughts are coming through my head are my own, and they're coming from me. So it makes it a lot easier to kind of sort things out in this kind of environment, because I know which thoughts are my own, and I know which thoughts are helping and hurting me, because nothing else is influencing me. So it's kind of a clean environment to kind of examine the contents of my mind and figure out what to do with everything in there, basically.
How does nature help you deal with problems in life?
I mean, I definitely have regrets. Everybody has regrets in life. I've made big mistakes, and I've kind of carried the weight of those mistakes with me. Some of them I've carried that weight for years, and I've always found nature to be a place where I can go to try to unpack some of that stuff, and I can try and figure out exactly what caused me to do the things that I regret. Maybe try and take some lessons there and incorporate those into my life moving forward so I don't make the same mistakes. But another part of the reason why I do retreat to nature when I'm feeling hurt or feeling down or in a bad mood or something, if I have something heavy on my mind that I need to deal with, nature is a place that I always retreat to. And I think that's because, a little bit like what I talked about earlier, nature is a place where it's just me and nothing else. There's no other influences. It's kind of an objective environment. It just gives me the space and the freedom to really dig into these things and kind of begin to unpack them. There's nobody that I have to explain myself to, and I usually don't come away from these trips into nature feeling fully healed or anything like that, but I think what it does is that it really allows me to examine the contents of my mind, regrets, mistakes, things that are bothering me. It allows me to take a close look at those things and kind of put them in their place, so that it's not just something that's like hiding under the surface that I haven't dealt with yet. It's a place where I can deal with things and then take the necessary steps moving forward from there. I see nature as a tool, basically, and I guess the tool is only as good as its user. So simply going out into nature is not going to heal you of all your problems. It's going to take some work on your part. And this is a kind of a new idea that I've recently come to terms with, because I used to think that you could just stick anybody in nature for a long enough period and they would come out having dealt with a lot of their issues. But I think it takes more than that. It takes a conscious decision on the individual's part to actually decide that they want to do something about it. If somebody has problems in their life that they may be causing, it's kind of a two-part process. You need to first admit that there is something wrong, and then you have to decide that you want to do something about it, and then nature is there for you to kind of work things out. So I think if you're somebody who wants to heal in nature, you have to make these decisions before you go out into nature. And then I think nature is probably the best environment for working on at least personal issues.
Has time in nature affected your relationship with your body?
since I've gotten into hiking, and especially long distance hiking where I'm doing really long-term physical activity, that has gotten me much more in touch with my body, and I have begun to be able to feel the inside of my body on a very subtle level, I think. Just as an example, when I'm hiking, I can tell if I'm starting to get an ache in one part of my body. I know that it's because some other muscle is sore, and it's because of the connections going on between those places. I know that if I stretch out that muscle, that the ache is going to go away. And I think that sort of body awareness has spread a little bit into my mental body, if you want to call it that too. Because I've had so much time alone to think and just kind of live in my own head, I feel like I've kind of mapped out my mind, and I understand where things are coming from, and I know that if I'm having some sort of mental anguish over here, it's because some other part of my life or my mentality is off in some way. So if I can deal with the root of that problem, then it's going to solve this other thing, which is really only a symptom. So when I think about my physical and my mental body, I feel like I can recognize the symptoms and trace them back to their root causes, because oftentimes the symptoms are not the problem. They trace back to something deeper. And if you can recognize and deal with that deeper thing, then the symptoms will go away eventually.
How does society think about nature?
On a bigger societal level, I think people think of nature in a couple different ways. The obvious first way being just as like a place to extract resources from. Modern society in general has been treating nature in that way for a long time, and there's not really anything new to say there. Something that is growing in the kind of modern society's viewpoint of nature is that it's a place for recreation. And I know there's always been a kind of a subculture of people who are extremely into recreation in nature, whether that's hunting or fishing or skiing or hiking or whatever. But that subculture seems to be growing, and it seems like a lot more people in mainstream society are seeing nature as a place for recreation. And I think that's great. It's getting more people out into nature, and that's never a bad thing. Well, I guess a lot of people think that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing, but there are some costs that come with that. So using nature as a place for recreation is a good thing, but I think it is so much more than that. And if we only treat nature as a place for recreation, we're missing out on, 80% of like what nature is good for. I don't see nature as a place to just like go do fun activities. I think nature is a place for getting back in touch with who we really are. Like I said before, I see nature as kind of our original home and the place that shaped us into who we are. And when we spend time away from nature, we start to get wrapped up in all these kind of artificial things, the common things that people pursue in modern society, like money and power and social status and all that kind of stuff. Nature, I guess, is a place to reconnect with the natural order of things. And I think we need that message more now than ever.
Where does your identity come from?
I've basically built my entire identity in nature. My whole idea of who I am and who I want to be comes from my experiences in nature. The most obvious thing that nature has done for me is that it has shown me what my strengths and weaknesses are. I think in regular life, for some reason, it's kind of easy to fool ourselves. We can blame our weaknesses on other people, or we can blame bad things that happen to us on external factors that are somebody else's fault. But when you're in nature, especially when you're alone, if something happens to you, it's probably your fault, and it's very hard to avoid that reality. So it's put me in touch with what I would consider is reality. It's put me in touch with it's put me in touch with exactly who I am, and every good and bad thing that comes with that. So the first step is just being aware of what those things are, and then if I want to do something about that, I can start to address some of those negative aspects of my personality.
Compare a day in nature versus regular life.
A day in nature versus a day in what I call regular life. Well, there's the obvious differences that in regular life you're probably going to work, you probably have a whole bunch of chores or things that you have to tick off the to-do list. And when you compare that to nature, it's a lot more freedom. Depends what your goal is in nature, but let's say on a thru-hike, you basically have one task for the day, and that's to walk to this point. You want to get in 20 miles or so, and that's basically the only thing that you have to do that day. When you compare that to regular life, there might be 100 things that you have to do that day. So nature is just simple. Life is extremely simple when you're in nature. Of course, it's not all good stuff. A day in nature compared to a day in at least my regular life is much harder physically. The physical exertion is a lot in nature compared to regular life, and that's uncomfortable. You're probably going to be dealing with some aches and pains, and dealing with the discomfort of weather. It's almost never the right temperature. Something about the weather is going to be bothering you. So that's stuff that you have to put up with. And especially when I'm out on trail, the thing that I miss the most is food. There's really no getting around it. When you're doing a backpacking trip, you just can't carry the kind of food that you can have in regular life. In regular life, I miss the simplicity, especially as I'm getting older and I'm kind of taking on more responsibilities in my life, and my job is getting more complicated. It has its pros and cons. As I take on more responsibilities in life, it comes with higher rewards. I have a more satisfying career, more satisfying relationships, but they come at a cost too, because it makes life really complicated, and it's just like a lot to think about all the time. So it can kind of feel overwhelming at times. And I think what I miss most about trail life when I'm in my regular life is just the simplicity of it. With this hike coming up, I'm really looking forward to just going back to the simple life, really, and not having so many obligations, and just having the time to think, really.
What would you tell someone who's never left the city?
I think one of the cool things about nature is that it can really be for every skill level and every type of experience level. So if you have absolutely no experience, just start out by going on some day hikes in a local city park or state park or something. Spend a few hours out there, and then see how your interest level changes over time. See if that makes you more or less interested. And I guess I would say, before you seek out nature, do it with the understanding that it's not always going to be comfortable. I think when a lot of people talk about nature and spending time out here, we talk about it with such a positive light that it makes it seem like you come out into nature, it's just going to be like pure bliss all the time. And that's not the case. It can be the case for moments, but usually to reach those moments, you have to go through some level of suffering first. So I think the biggest thing is to just kind of set your expectations properly, knowing that spending time in nature is probably going to be uncomfortable at times, but that's the whole point, because it's worth it. You have to go through some of that discomfort in order to reach some of the values that you can find out here.
Solo versus group hiking.
I've noticed that most people prefer hiking in groups. And I've always kind of wrestled with that. I find pros and cons to each, but I think I like hiking solo, maybe more than hiking in groups. I think it's just an aspect of my personality. I'm a very introverted person. I like my solitude. I get re-energized when I'm alone, and it kind of drains me to be with people. And that's just kind of the way I am. So for me personally, I find it more beneficial to spend time alone in nature. Part of the reason that I enjoy solo hiking so much is that it gives me the opportunity to do like a really deep introspective dive into my mind. And I find that pretty hard to do when I'm around others. I think part of the reason why it's more popular to hike with other people is because a lot of people are actually uncomfortable with doing that introspective thinking. It's not always an easy thing to do, and a lot of times you have to confront a lot of uncomfortable thoughts and things that you would rather not think about. The reason that I like doing that is because I'd rather see those things, break them down and kind of figure them out so that I can solve them in the long run. It's just a matter of having some short-term discomfort and trading that for long-term benefit. But it's much easier to do the flip side of that and take short-term comfort and trade that for a long-term cost, which is what a lot of people end up doing, I think. Another part of the reason why I enjoy solo hiking is because I'm kind of uncomfortable with opening up to other people. So I think a lot of people have an easier time opening up in groups with close friends, and I'm naturally kind of a more closed off person, so it's harder for me to do that. And I think that's why it's a little bit easier for me to do solo hiking rather than group hiking. But they both have their pros and cons. Solo hiking can get pretty lonely, and even though I'm kind of an introverted person who enjoys being alone, I still get lonely too. And there are definitely times, especially on these long hikes, where it would be really nice to have some companionship. And another pretty common argument when it comes to solo versus hiking in a group is that it's safer to hike in a group, because if something happens to you, then somebody can help you, obviously. And for the most part, that is true. Maybe one argument that doesn't get talked about very much is that there are dangers to hiking in a group too, because then you have to make decisions as a group, and sometimes that can be hard. It's especially if the group doesn't know each other very well. If you have some really strong personalities mixed in with some more submissive personalities, the strong personalities are probably going to win out in that decision making, and they might not always be right. The decision making process is much more complicated when you're in a group, and when you're on your own, you don't have anyone to check your decisions, but at least you know that the decisions that are being made are yours and yours alone. So there's no one else to blame if something goes wrong.
Why is introspection important?
Let's just say that introspection is not something that's encouraged in our society. I think the exact opposite is encouraged. I think when people have personal problems or things that would call for some introspective thinking, the thing that they're told to do is to go seek help, to have somebody else tell them what's wrong with them. That might help, I think. Like what I'm talking about is going to therapy, basically. To have a therapist tell you what's wrong with you could be very beneficial, because then you could work on it. But I think if if you're not the one that's discovering these problems, it's very hard to actually do anything about them. I know, at least for me, I need to be the one that discovers the problem before I feel a personal connection or responsibility to actually do anything about it. If somebody's telling me that I'm doing something wrong, it takes an extra level of like self-control on my part to actually take them seriously and to believe them. I think a lot of times when somebody's telling you that you're doing something wrong, you want to just argue and say that they're wrong or something. A little bit of introspective thinking goes a long way, and I think that that's all it takes for like a large portion of our society, is just a little bit of introspective thinking. So one thing that I've seen with my generation especially is that a lot of people are waking up to all the things that are bad in the world. Like, there's a lot of things that are bad in this world that we live in. A lot of people feel some sort of duty or responsibility to fix these problems. And it's coming from a really good place. These people want to help, they want to make the world better, and they want to make the world a better place for all of us to live in. And it's very, very admirable goals that these people have. But I found that a lot of people with goals like this have not put any work into themselves, and personally, like, they are a wreck. And the more they try to fix the world, the more they actually end up complicating things and kind of screwing things up and actually working against their goals. So I'd like to do all these things too. Of course, I'd like to make the world a better place to live. But my approach has been to start within and then kind of work outward, because I think if you don't have yourself in order, then there's no way that you can put the world into order. So that's where I've been putting all my energy. At first it seems like a selfish thing to focus on yourself so much and to be putting so much energy into yourself, but I think that it's what's going to work in the long run.
Is nature a place for escape?
In my early college days, when I was just kind of discovering my passion for nature, I was also much more shy than I am now, and I had a hard time making friends. I had a couple close friends in my life, and the people that were in my life were all very good people, but I always felt like I was kind of falling short of where I should be, and as far as my like social life, I always felt very awkward at parties and kind of uncomfortable in a lot of social situations. So naturally, I kind of secluded myself. I would spend a lot of time at home, and I spent a lot of time alone in nature, just because those were the places that I felt comfortable. In a lot of social settings, I felt uncomfortable, so I sort of ran away from those and I escaped to nature. I think it's kind of just luck that I chose nature as a form of escape, because there's a lot of very unhealthy ways to escape, and it just turns out that nature is kind of a healthy way to escape. It took a long time to kind of reconcile with that and understand that I was escaping. I was kind of running away from my problems and going into nature, because that was the place that I felt comfortable. That time in nature revealed those things to me, and it kind of made it a conscious thing that I could deal with. So it's something that I'm still dealing with, but so I've made a lot of progress since then, and I'm at a point now where I don't have to run away, or I don't have to escape. Now when I go into nature, it's not to escape things, it's more to find things. I don't feel like I run away from things in life as much as I used to, and I don't use nature as a form of escape anymore. Nature is something that builds me up, it makes me stronger. And the best that I've come up with so far is that nature is a perspective calibration tool. That's the role that nature plays in my life. I think in regular life it's very hard to have a properly calibrated perspective, because you have all these other influences that are always trying to persuade you and influence you in some way. I've found that it can be kind of hard to stay in touch with reality, and we tend to build these worlds for ourselves that we like to live in because it makes it easier to kind of understand the world. And we might think it's real, but there's some sort of objective reality that doesn't quite line up with these worlds that we build for ourselves. So that's why I go into nature, because I see nature as the perfect objective environment. Like when you're out here, you're in reality and there's no arguing with it. So I kind of use this environment as a tool for calibrating my perspective, this world that I've built for myself, and trying to align it as close as I can with objective reality.
Tell us about the Mind, Body, Soul project.
So this project is called Mind, Body, and Soul, the nature of well-being. And it's called that because we think that there are three elements basically to our overall well-being, and that's your physical health, your mental health, and then some sort of spiritual aspect. And I've been on my own journey with these three elements. I've been lucky to be born with good genes, so I've never had to put a whole lot of effort into my physical health. I don't really eat in any particular way. I don't really exercise in any regimented style. I'm just kind of lucky that I've been able to remain skinny, and that a lot of my hobbies involve exercise, so that keeps my body pretty physically healthy. But there's always room for improvement there, and as I get older, I think I'm going to have to put some more effort into my physical health. Mental health is basically the realm that I've been living in for the past decade, probably. Ever since I started maturing, I guess, out of being a teenager and becoming more interested in life in general, and just kind of like deeper thoughts and stuff like that. I've realized how much of a role my own thought process plays in the way that I perceive things around me, and I've taken a very strong interest in my own mental health. I think I'm pretty far along in that development at this point. I know that I still have a lot to learn, but I've built a really solid foundation, I think, for my mental health, because I know how to trace thoughts back to their roots and kind of understand where my thoughts come from. And then as far as spiritual development, that's something that I've always been fascinated in, and I've kind of dabbled in different methods for exploring spiritual development, but it's never something that I have really pursued with any very strong effort, I guess. One of the guys that I've interviewed for this project, named Nimba Nomad, talked about this. He thinks that you have to have your physical and mental health kind of in order and very well established. And once you have those two things, then you can build off of that into a spiritual dimension. I think I'm just reaching the point in my life where I have a pretty solid physical and mental foundation, and I think I'm ready to kind of build off of that into a spiritual dimension, whatever that may be. I think I'm pretty open-minded in that area, and I'm kind of excited to explore it.
What are the costs of through hiking?
If you ever hear people talk about through hiking, you're probably going to hear them talk about how great it is. And it's obviously, I believe in all those things that make a through hike great. There's a ton of benefits that come from through hiking, but something you might not hear from a lot of people is that there's a lot of costs, and that's just a reality. If you're going to spend 5 months out in the wilderness, that means you can't spend 5 months in your regular life, and for most people that means you have to quit your job, you have to pause your entire source of income, you have to kind of put all your relationships on hold, and it's an extreme cost. So the reward needs to be great in order to make that worth it. And I've found out that it is, and I think most people that do through hikes figure out that it's definitely worth it. But it can be kind of hard to see what the benefits are unless you've done something like that, because the benefits that you get from a through hike are not tangible. You're not going to end up with money or situation in life isn't going to change at all. If anything, you're going to be worse off when you come back from a thru hike than when you start a thru hike, at least as far as like career-wise. And I think it's hard for a lot of people in our society to see that, especially because we're a very kind of tangible society. We need to see and feel and touch things in order to believe that they're real. But doing a thru hike can kind of get you in touch with the valuable things in life that are not tangible. And a lot of people that do thru hikes realize that those intangible things in life are way more important than the things that we can hold.
What are your fears in life?
One of my biggest fears in life is just being unsatisfied with my life. I see a lot of people that are working dead-end jobs that they don't like, and they're just unhappy all the time. Even if they are able to find fulfillment outside of work, they're spending 40 hours a week doing something that they don't like doing. And maybe it's a kind of privileged thing to say that, because I know that sometimes you don't have a choice and you have to do that kind of work, but I've been lucky enough to be in a position where I can pursue a life that I enjoy basically all the time. And so one of my biggest fears is to have that taken away from me, to be in a position where I need to spend a lot of my time doing something that I don't enjoy. So I'm working very hard to try and maintain this lifestyle that I've kind of found myself in. On a personal level, my motivations are the same as my fears, basically. My motivation is to build a life that I enjoy and that I'm satisfied with, and to feel like I've accomplished something. I'm very driven by accomplishing things, and that can have a negative aspect to it for sure, but I find a lot of joy and satisfaction in getting things done, and on a bigger level outside of myself, a big part of my motivation is to basically pursue this purpose in life that I have kind of discovered for myself. Somewhere along the lines, I realized that I do have a purpose, or I have chosen to pursue this purpose, which is to discover the benefits of nature and kind of share that with the world. And so that's a big part of my motivation, is to do that in the best way that I can.
What's it going to be like thru hiking with your girlfriend?
So when I first started dating this girl, Amy, we were having a lot of really good, deep conversations about life. That was kind of one of the ways that I knew that I could be with her for a while, is that she could have these conversations, and that we both thought about life in kind of deep ways, I think. And through those conversations, it was revealed that she has had a lot of trauma from her childhood, and she had a pretty rough childhood, and a lot of that stuff has stuck around into adult life, and it still takes a pretty heavy toll on her today. So naturally, I talked about my thru hikes and kind of what they've done for me, and they've been extremely beneficial in my own life when it comes to those kind of personal problems. So over some time, she kind of warmed up to this idea of thru hiking, and she's the one actually who suggested it to me, that we do a thru hike together. The logical choice would be to do something like the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest Trail, especially since it's her first thru hike. But neither one of us really like the crowds that we would find out on those trails. We both appreciate the solitude that we find in nature. So we chose the CDT. The Continental Divide Trail is still going to be way more established and probably more popular than any trail that I've ever hiked, but it will be much less populated than those other two well-known thru hikes. As those thoughts turned into actual planning and turning this into reality, it's been a kind of intense process as we both work to put our lives on hold. It's been pretty stressful at times as we kind of realize the amount of work that it's going to take to actually make this happen, and the the stress, I think, has taken a toll on our relationship and sometimes. But I think it's all been necessary, and we usually end up coming out of these things closer and stronger than we were before. So it's just the planning process on its own has kind of built us up, I think, and hopefully I think it's prepared us for this hike. You're never really prepared for something like this, but I think we're building a good foundation that we can kind of work off of as we go forward from here. I'm definitely nervous about a few things on this hike. I'm worried that our paces are not going to be able to match the required pace that we're going to have to keep in order to reach Glacier National Park by October. I mean, there's just a reality that you have to average a certain number of miles to get there in time. So I'm hoping that we can maintain that. I'm a little bit worried how I'm going to handle hiking with somebody, being so close to somebody for so long on the trail. Because I'm used to doing these trails, if not completely solo, at least I'm on my own and I'm independent and I can just leave when I want to. When I have hiked with other people, we've all been very independent and we all kind of maintain our own pace. But with this hike, we're going to have to stick together, so it's going to be something for me to adjust to. And I think I can do it, but it's going to take some time, and it's going to take a lot of patience on both our parts, I think. On the flip side of that, I think there are going to be some benefits that come out of it too. I think I'm at a point in my life where I have spent enough time alone in the wilderness to attain a lot of the benefits that come from spending time alone in the wilderness, and now it's time for me to spend some time with somebody in the wilderness. That's kind of the opposite direction that most people do it in. I think most people start out with groups, and then if they get there, they end up spending more time alone. I started out spending more time alone, and I think I'm going to start to appreciate spending time with people, especially my girlfriend, in the wilderness. And I'm going to see how that's going to kind of strengthen our relationship and I think just make me a better and more patient person.
How do you feel about thru hiking with dogs?
To say that Amy is close with her dog is an understatement. They are basically inseparable. Minnow goes everywhere with Amy. She even brings her to work, and they spend very little time apart. So I knew that when we decided to do a thru hike together that Minnow was going to have to be a part of that decision. Even though I'm kind of uncomfortable with the idea of bringing dogs on a thru hike, there's a lot of things that'll just make that way more complicated. There's a lot more that can go wrong by bringing a dog, but it's kind of not even something that we're going to argue about because it's going to happen. So Minnow's coming with us. And shortly after we made the decision to do the thru hike, Minnow got pregnant, and she had a litter of 8 puppies, which was planned. So we kept one of those 8 puppies and named her Echo, after my favorite lake in the UP called Echo Lake. And for the longest time, I was pretty adamant about not bringing Echo, just because she is pretty young. She's only about 6 months old at this point, and having 2 dogs would complicate things even more. And so we were looking for somebody to watch her for the summer, and that was proving to be kind of difficult. A couple friends said they would do it. Nobody seemed that psyched about the idea. And eventually I just kind of figured we're already bringing 1 dog, like it's not that much more work to have 2 dogs. So we might as well bring them both. And by this point I've bonded pretty closely with Echo, so I don't want to leave her behind anyway. And I'm still pretty uneasy with the idea of thru hiking with dogs. My personal belief is that I won't say you should or shouldn't do it, but I think it's not really a great idea to thru hike with a dog, but we're going to give it a try. I'm not too worried about these guys on the trail because they're both pretty good trail dogs. They're both pretty athletic, and I think they can keep up with us. there might be a little bit of growing pains starting out as they kind of adapt to trail life, but I think they can handle the physical side of it. The tricky parts are going to be in town and going through national parks. So both of the dogs are registered service dogs, so that means that they can stay in hotels with us, and technically they are allowed in national parks. So we're gonna try and do that, even though that makes me uncomfortable too. I don't really think dogs belong in national parks, but that's kind of our plan at this point.
What are you looking forward to on the hike?
Something that I'm looking forward to with the hike is to kind of explore this spiritual realm a little bit more. That's something that I've always been fascinated by, but never really put a whole lot of effort into it. And I think I'm at a good point in my life where I can start to branch out into that spiritual dimension, kind of figure out what it means to me, because I don't really ascribe to any of the organized religions or kind of established ways of thinking about spiritual things. I like to take bits and pieces from all of them and kind of build my own idea of what that is. My number one goal with this hike is to complete the hike with Amy and both the dogs, because that's going to be a hard enough challenge on its own, and for us to all still be in a good, happy relationship. I think Amy needs this hike, and I think she knows that she needs this hike. But with that being said, it's not going to be easy, and there's going to be a lot of suffering. And I'm not just talking about physical suffering. There's going to be a lot of kind of mental, emotional anguish that we're going to experience on this trail. Some of that's going to be my fault because maybe I'm going to push her too hard, or I'm not going to have the patience that she needs or something. And some of it's just going to be her processing all of this stuff that has happened to her throughout her life. So it's going to be very hard. But I know that she can do it. I know that she has what it takes to do it. It's just a matter of her body actually holding up, because that's something that I'm kind of worried about. She's got kind of bad knees and a bad back that could act up, and I know that she can push through a lot of pain, but there's a certain point where I've seen it before with other hikers where your body just doesn't allow you to go any farther. And as long as she doesn't reach that point, I know that she'll do it.
Is Amy prepared for this?
I think Amy doesn't exactly know what she's getting into, and I think she knows that. I think she knows that there's just, like, you can prepare so much, but at a certain point, you just have to go for it and kind of figure things out on the fly. So this is going to be a major shock to the system, and it's going to take a while to adapt to it, I think. I think there's going to be a lot of times when she just wants to quit. It's going to be really hard, and she's going to be really uncomfortable. But I also think that she won't allow herself to quit unless she absolutely needs to. Or I guess unless she thinks that she's gotten everything from the trail that she can get from it. And she might find that before reaching the end. This is something that we've kind of talked about too. She's not really out here to hike the full 3,100 miles or whatever we're going to do to complete the whole trail. What she's out here to do is to heal and to kind of deal with this stuff that's happened in her life. So if she feels like she's done that before the end of the trail, she might not want to go on. And that's something that we're going to have to discuss or deal with if that ever happens. But I think mentally and emotionally, it's going to be a roller coaster. Lots of ups and downs. I think I've had a lot of practice dealing with this already. Especially as the pressure ramps up for us to prepare for this hike and get all these things done that we have to do, and it's been crazy preparing for this hike. Life has been extremely chaotic, and there's been a lot of emotions involved. And she's an extremely emotional person, and I'm not emotional at all. Some of that is that she's kind of helped me get in touch with my emotions a little bit more, because I tend to repress them sometimes. But I've had a lot of practice dealing with her emotions and not feeding into them, and not becoming emotional myself. So I don't know, I think the hike is just going to be an extension of that, and we're both going to get pretty good at dealing with our emotions by the end of this hike, I think. Amy keeps telling me that I'm going to see her at her lowest point on this hike. I think I've already seen glimpses of that. And I think when I do see that, I think it kind of inspires me actually to be stronger and to be more of a rock or something for her to hold on to. I think maybe that's necessary, that you have to get to your lowest point, because at that stage and that place, that's your root, and we will both be there at your root. And I think from there we can kind of help build you back up from there. To deal with a lot of this stuff, we have to go down to that level, and it's like the deepest, most personal, most protected place in a person, and that might get broken open, and that's the place that we have to go to in order to rebuild, I think. Yeah. And don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube and follow us on social media to stay up to date with this project.